It was a calm night in Chicago. The rain lightly tapped on the asphalt, reflecting the streetlights and cars. Kira Johnson, a 26-year-old African-American police officer, was driving home after a long shift on patrol. Exhausted and eager to get home, Kira relaxed to the sound of soothing music from her playlist, trying to de-stress. She had recently graduated from the police academy and was full of energy, determined to make a difference. The daughter of a pastor and a teacher, Kira had always believed in the importance of justice, equality, and respect for all people, regardless of their background or ethnicity. She wanted to be more than just an officer. Her goal was to rise through the ranks and fight for significant reforms within the police force. As she approached a busy avenue, suddenly, the blue and red lights of a police car flashed in her rearview mirror. Kira frowned. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Even so, she complied and pulled over. The sound of firm footsteps echoed towards her. Kira's heart began to beat faster, not out of fear, but because of the strangeness of the situation. Looking through the rearview mirror, she saw a tall, blonde white woman with a serious expression approaching the car. It was Detective Sarah Mitchell, a 40-year-old veteran known for her rigid and condescending attitude, especially towards younger officers. Sarah knocked on the window with an impatience that was clear from the force of her knock. Kira lowered the window. "License and registration, please," Sarah said, her voice cold and distant. "Sure," Kira replied, trying to stay calm as she handed over her documents. Sarah snatched them quickly, not even glancing at Kira. "Did you know you were driving over the speed limit?" Kira blinked, confused. "No, detective. I believe I was within the limit." Sarah let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "Of course, you believe that. Everyone says the same thing, don't they?" Without waiting for a response, Sarah stepped back, looking Kira up and down with a judgmental gaze. She seemed to sneer at her appearance, as if concluding that Kira was just another reckless young woman. "Stay right there," Sarah ordered as she walked back to the police car, clearly checking Kira's information. Kira sat silently, feeling humiliated and indignant. She knew Sarah had no idea she was also a police officer, which made the whole situation even more surreal. After a few minutes, Sarah returned. "I'll let you off with a warning this time, but be careful. Next time, you might not be so lucky," Sarah declared, handing back the documents with an ironic smile. Kira took the documents, her hand trembling slightly. But before she could respond, Sarah was already walking back to her car, not even looking back. As Sarah drove away, Kira sat in silence, staring at the steering wheel, feeling a mix of frustration and anger bubbling inside her. That detective had treated her like nothing, like she was worthless. But Kira wasn't that kind of person. She wasn't going to let that moment define who she was. No, she would use it as fuel to continue her fight, to prove that she was much more than Detective Sarah Mitchell could ever imagine. The next morning, Kira still felt the impact of that encounter. She arrived at the police department with renewed purpose. She wasn't going to tell anyone what had happened, not yet. Instead, she decided to stay focused on her work and her plans to advance in her career. While she was at her desk, organizing reports, she heard the conference room door open and saw Sarah Mitchell walk in, talking with some superiors. The air grew heavier. Kira tried not to show her surprise, but inside, she wondered how she could work in the same environment as that woman, now knowing how she felt about her. "Johnson," called Sergeant Lopez, a tough but fair man, motioning for her to come into the room. Kira stood up, took a deep breath, and walked into the room. Inside, along with Lopez, stood Sarah, arms crossed, and Captain Harris, a 50-year-old man known for his integrity. "Johnson, we're putting together a special task force to investigate a drug trafficking case in the city. We need dedicated people with good prospects for growth. We want you on board," Lopez explained, his gaze firm. Kira felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Working on a task force was an incredible opportunity for her career. However, the look from Sarah, now studying her more closely, made her stomach churn. Did Sarah recognize her? Or was she just judging her again? "I'm in," Kira replied, trying to sound confident. Lopez smiled, pleased, but Sarah remained silent, her eyes never leaving Kira's. From that moment, Kira knew she was stepping into something much bigger than she had imagined. What she didn't know was that this task force would take her on a journey that would forever change the course of her life, and Sarah Mitchell's. The first task force meeting took place the next day in a conference room at the police department. Kira arrived early, trying to mentally prepare for the challenge ahead. When she entered the room, she felt the tense atmosphere. Sarah Mitchell was there, sitting at the head of the table, flipping through some reports, but when Kira walked in, her eyes followed her for a brief moment before returning to the papers. Around the table sat other team members: Detective Carlos Mendez, a seasoned investigator known for his undercover skills; Federal Agent Emma Reed, specialized in tracking criminal financial activities; and Rookie Officer Jake Turner, an athletic and charismatic man who seemed determined to impress. Captain Harris entered shortly after, bringing a projector and a set of files. He took his place in the center of the room, drawing everyone's attention. "The case we have involves a rapidly expanding drug trafficking network in Chicago," Harris began, as the projector displayed images of suspects and strategic locations. "We have reason to believe that this network is tied to an international cartel, which makes the investigation even more dangerous." Sarah took over from there, causing Kira some unease as she mentally prepared to deal with her presence. "We already have a few leads, but we need more evidence to secure warrants and effective arrests," Sarah said, her voice firm and commanding. "Our job is to infiltrate and take down this organization from the inside. We need discretion, strategy, and teamwork. Any mistake could cost lives." Kira listened to every word Sarah said, while her mind recalled the humiliating encounter on the road. Still, she knew she needed to focus on the work and leave her emotions aside. This was her chance to prove her worth, and nothing would stop her. "Johnson," Sarah suddenly called, making Kira look up. "Do you have any experience with undercover operations?" Kira hesitated for a second, surprised at being called on. "Yes, detective. I worked on small-scale operations in my previous district, infiltrating local gangs and gathering information for arrests," Kira responded, trying to sound professional. Sarah tilted her head, assessing the response. "Good. We'll need someone with those skills for this mission," Sarah said, before continuing her briefing. Kira felt a mix of satisfaction and nerves. As much as she was eager to stand out, the idea of working so closely with Sarah was uncomfortable. After the meeting, the group dispersed, and Kira was organizing her things when Carlos Mendez approached her. "Hey, Johnson," he began with a friendly smile. "I heard you're new here. If you need any help, you can count on me." Kira smiled, grateful for the gesture. "Thanks, Carlos. It's good to know I can count on someone. This case is big, but I trust we'll take these guys down," he said, a determined glint in his eyes. Before they could continue their conversation, Sarah passed by them, casting a brief but intense look at Kira. There was unresolved tension between the two, something only Kira seemed to notice. However, Sarah maintained her rigid and professional posture. The following week, the task force began preparing for their first undercover operation. Kira, Carlos, and Jake were assigned to infiltrate one of the nightclubs where the drug trafficking network operated. The place was known for being frequented by figures from the criminal underworld, and the team's objective was to get close to the leaders without raising suspicion. Before the operation, there was one last briefing at the department. Sarah led the meeting. "This club is the meeting point for the operational arm of the cartel. We need direct information from the leaders and solid evidence to incriminate them. Johnson, Turner, you'll be our eyes inside. Mendez, you'll be outside, ensuring we have a safe exit route in case anything goes wrong." Kira nodded, but still felt the weight of expectations on her shoulders. This would be her first large-scale undercover operation, and she knew that any mistake could compromise the entire team. That night, Kira dressed like an ordinary club-goer. Tight jeans, a black blouse, and light makeup. When she looked in the mirror, she tried to remember who she was, an officer determined to rise through the ranks, not the woman who had been humiliated by Sarah Mitchell. She was there to do her job and prove her worth. Jake met her in front of the club. He was also disguised, wearing a leather jacket with a confident expression on his face. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," Kira replied, trying to sound as confident as he did. Inside the club, the environment was filled with loud music, flashing lights, and people dancing. Kira and Jake blended into the crowd easily, trying to seem natural while searching for the network's leaders. After about an hour, Kira finally identified one of their targets, a man named Victor Morales, who was the right-hand man of the cartel's boss. He was sitting in a VIP booth, surrounded by armed men and women who seemed more interested in his money than in him. Kira and Jake exchanged glances. They knew they needed to get close to Victor, but any wrong move could put their lives at risk. Adrenaline rushed through Kira's veins as she calculated her next steps. Jake was the first to move, approaching the bar near Victor's booth. He discreetly signaled to Kira, who followed him. When they reached the bar, they overheard part of Victor's conversation with his men. They were discussing a new drug shipment set to arrive in the city in a few days. Kira discreetly activated a small recorder hidden in her belt, capturing every word. But then, something went wrong. One of Victor's men noticed Jake looking towards the booth and approached them, suspicious. "What are you looking at?" the man asked, his hand moving toward his waist where a gun was concealed. Jake tried to improvise. "Nothing, man. Just admiring the place." "Big operation you've got here," he said with a confident smile. The man didn't seem convinced, and Kira's heart began to race. If they were discovered, they could be killed before any backup arrived. But before the situation could escalate, Sarah Mitchell appeared in the club, elegantly dressed and walking towards them as if she was part of the operation. She looked directly at the man and, with a firm and confident posture, said, "Leave them. They're with me." The man hesitated but then backed off, mumbling something as he returned to the booth. Kira looked at Sarah, surprised but grateful. Despite everything that had happened between them, in that moment, Sarah had saved their lives. Kira knew this operation was just beginning, and what lay ahead would be even more dangerous. The nightclub operation was just the beginning of a series of events that would challenge not only Kira's skills as a police officer, but also her deepest beliefs about justice, power, and trust. In the following days, the task force gathered enough evidence to plan a new operation, this time at a warehouse where a large shipment of drugs was to be distributed. Kira was focused, determined to do the job perfectly. She knew she was being watched, not only by her colleagues but also by Sarah Mitchell, who now seemed to be paying even closer attention to her actions. During a meeting with the team, Kira noticed something strange. Sarah seemed uncomfortable. She was more tense than usual, and the way she looked at the warehouse map made her seem worried. "Is something wrong, Detective?" Kira asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Sarah hesitated for a moment before shaking her head. "No, nothing you need to worry about," she replied, her voice cold. But there was something in her tone that didn't convince Kira. That night, unable to ignore her instinct, Kira began digging deeper into Sarah's past. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this woman than simple professional rivalry. What she discovered was surprising. Years ago, Sarah had been involved in an internal investigation into police corruption, but the case had never been fully resolved. There were rumors that Sarah had tried to dismantle a corruption network within the force, but something went wrong, and the case was covered up. Since then, Sarah had become even more rigid and reserved. Kira felt a chill at the thought. She began to wonder if Sarah was hiding more than just professional rigidity. Was there some connection between her and the criminals they were investigating? The day of the warehouse operation finally arrived. The tension was palpable as the team prepared. Kira was ready, equipped with her bulletproof vest, a gun in her holster, and her badge hidden under her jacket. The plan was simple. The team would split in two. Kira and Jake would go in undercover, while Sarah and Carlos would stay outside, ready to act if the situation got out of hand. The warehouse was a dark, empty place, with stacks of crates piled in rows. When Kira and Jake entered, they were greeted by a few armed men, clearly suspicious. But Kira remained calm, and Jake managed to negotiate their entry, claiming they were there to discuss the merchandise. Inside the warehouse, they saw Victor Morales again, overseeing the drug distribution. Kira kept her eyes on him, trying not to raise suspicion, but something didn't seem right. The amount of drugs was much larger than they had predicted. This wasn't just a local drug operation. It was an international shipment, much bigger and more dangerous. As Kira tried to assess the situation, suddenly, a familiar voice echoed through the space. "Do you think you can just come into my territory and walk away unscathed?" Victor's voice was sharp and dripping with arrogance. He was looking directly at Sarah, who had infiltrated deeper into the warehouse than planned. Her presence seemed unexpected, but not to Victor. Kira realized, horrified, that Victor and Sarah knew each other, and not in a friendly way. "I knew you'd show up, Sarah," Victor said with a cold smile. "Always meddling in other people's business, aren't you?" Kira felt a knot in her stomach. Sarah was involved with Victor somehow. But how? And why? Before she could process what was happening, gunshots rang out. The operation had been compromised. Kira pulled Jake behind a stack of crates, trying to avoid the bullets echoing through the warehouse. Carlos and the other team members stormed the building, exchanging fire with the criminals. The situation was chaotic. But Kira managed to stay calm. Her priority was to get out alive and ensure they captured Victor. When the dust settled, Victor had disappeared, escaping through a secondary exit. Sarah stood beside Kira, her expression a mix of frustration and regret. After the failed operation, Kira could no longer contain her questions. She confronted Sarah back at the police department. "What's going on, Sarah? You and Victor. What's your connection to him?" Kira asked, her voice filled with distrust. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes looking tired. "It's not what you think, Johnson," Sarah began, looking at Kira with a seriousness that surprised her. "I've been trying to take down Victor Morales for years. He was one of the main targets of the corruption investigation I was involved in. But when I got too close, my superiors abandoned me and Victor got away. Since then, I've been doing everything I can to capture him." Kira remained silent for a moment, absorbing Sarah's words. "Then why didn't you tell us this before?" Kira asked, still suspicious. "Because I didn't know who to trust," Sarah admitted, her voice softer now. "After what happened in that investigation, I realized there was corruption at every level of the police. I couldn't risk someone sabotaging this operation too." Kira wanted to believe her, but something still didn't add up. Why did Victor seem so confident when he saw Sarah? He seemed to know something Kira didn't. As Kira tried to process the information, a new twist occurred. She received an anonymous call instructing her to go to an abandoned location outside the city if she wanted to know the truth about Sarah Mitchell. Against her better judgment, Kira decided to go. At the location, Kira met a mysterious man who revealed himself to be a former police officer involved in the same corruption investigation that Sarah had mentioned. He told Kira that Sarah had approached Victor Morales at the time to try to take him down, but the investigation spiraled out of control, and Sarah was accused of making deals with him. "She was never corrupt," the man said, "but she made serious mistakes. And now she's paying the price for trying to bring justice with her own hands." Kira's mind spun. Sarah wasn't the villain, but she wasn't completely innocent either. She had tried to take down the system on her own and failed. And now, her obsession with Victor Morales was putting everyone in danger. Determined to end this once and for all, Kira confronted Sarah again. This time, she didn't hold back. "I know about your connection with Victor. I know you tried to take him down in the past and failed. But we're not going to make the same mistake again. We need to do this the right way together." Sarah looked at Kira with a mix of surprise and respect. "You're right," she finally admitted. "I let my obsession with him blind me. But now it's time to do this the right way." With the task force's help, Sarah and Kira planned one last operation to capture Victor. This time, they were more prepared. The team managed to locate one of Victor's hideouts outside the city, and with a well-coordinated plan, they surrounded the place. The final confrontation was intense. Victor was surrounded by his men, but the task force managed to outmaneuver them. However, Victor didn't go down easily. He tried to flee once again, but Kira and Sarah intercepted him. When they finally captured him, Sarah looked at Victor, her face serious and tired. "It's over, Victor," she said, her voice firm. Victor, now cornered, only laughed. "You'll never clean up the mess that's all over this system, Sarah. This will never end." But Kira, looking at Sarah and the entire operation they had carried out together, knew that while it would be a hard and long process, justice was still worth fighting for. She felt that, finally, they were on the right path to making a real difference. With Victor in custody, the internal investigation into police corruption was also reopened, thanks to Sarah's testimony and the evidence collected by the task force. Though Sarah had made mistakes in the past, her desire to fix the system led her to redemption, not just with others, but with herself. Kira, for her part, was promoted, her determination and bravery recognized by her superiors. She realized that the episode with Sarah had shaped her view of leadership and justice. Kira knew her path in the police force would be long and full of challenges, but now, more than ever, she was ready to face any adversity. And although there was still much to be done, Kira felt that, with people like Sarah by her side, even if they weren't perfect, the future could be a more just and equal place.